Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Enterprise DevSecOps Summit brought to you by VMware Tanzu. For this event, the hardworking staff of the Tech News site Virtualization and Cloud Review has brought together some of the best independent experts on today's topic. Thanks for joining us. I'm John K. Waters, Editor-in-Chief of Application Development Trends, and I'll be your host, the first of 3 information-packed sessions. But before we get underway, I need to go over a few housekeeping details. Each of today's sessions is being recorded for later access. Keep an eye out for an email with a link to that recording coming your way within the next few days. Each of today's sessions will be followed by a 5 to 10 minute Q&A. You can type your questions into the Q&A box at any time. Please feel free to add your questions as they occur throughout the summit. We'll do our very best to get to. Our sponsor, VMware Tanzu, has provided some resources that can be found on the right-hand side of your screen. Please take a moment to check those out. And last but not least, at the end of the 3rd session, one lucky attendee will be receiving a Surface Pro 7, Microsoft's ultralight tablet featuring a laptop-class Core Intel processor, all-day battery, and HD cameras. But you must be present to win, so stick with us. And now let's get started with our first session, DevSecOps 101, why DevSecOps is the future of enterprise security. Our presenter today is Sergey Chubarov. Sergey is a team leader and sought-after speaker with a long list of credentials. He's a Microsoft MVP, a cloud architecture and security trainer, an offensive security certified professional, an offensive security experienced pen tester, an MCT regional lead, an EC Council instructor, and a Microsoft certified trainer. There's more, but I'm getting a cramp. Needless to say, we are in for an informative session. Take it away, Sergey.
Thanks, John. Hello, everyone. John knows more about me than actually I do. And so thanks for this great introduction. And let's get started. So hopefully someday I will introduce you and also talk more about your credentials. We're going to start the session number 1. As John said, I will be a presenter here. Let me say a few more words, not just about credentials, but what I usually do. So I work for the company and I work with different companies. And mostly what I do penetration tests, and also my team, we implement different security services. At the same time, so we do it for our customers. At the same time, we have internal development, and our development team also struggle with this security issues because we develop products and it has to be secure as well. I work for external companies and I have this similar process in my company as well. Also, I speak at different conferences like this as well. And by the way, if you want to contact me later on or know about other conferences I'm going to speak, usually I announce that in my LinkedIn, so feel free to follow me there as well. I'm too lazy to add tweets, so I don't have Twitter. LinkedIn, that's going to be the best channel. All right, so without being said, let's get started. So in this session is going to be DevOps and DevSecOps 101. So we're going to talk about basics. Of course, it will not give you all of the answers to your questions. If you want to implement that, of course, it will not give you the steps, or it will not provide you all the steps. But this session will establish the basics, and especially if you are not a developer, especially if you're from security team, and you don't have a lot of development experience, you do not communicate with developers a lot, and to understand better what DevSecOps means, that should be a good idea to listen to this session from the beginning to the end. So first, we're going to talk about DevOps in general and how this DevOps became DevSecOps. Then we will talk about pipeline and what we can add to our pipeline, CI/CD pipeline, that's from DevOps, to make it more secure. And then we're going to talk about tools. In general, I will tell you about this, but I'm I will tell you about this again. I will tell you about this again later on. But DevOps and DevSecOps not about tools, but tools also are important to automate the process. So we will talk about tools, and I'm going to show you those tools as well. So first, we'll talk about basics. Then I'm going to give you a live demo of tools. And then, of course, we will take a look at your questions. And I can see some commentaries. Voice is not very clear. And if that's the case for someone else, let us know. So now, let's get started. First topic here, evolution of DevOps into DevSecOps. So first, let's take a look at what traditional development lifecycle looks like. Especially, it's going to be useful for those who are not developers here, and maybe you're from security team, and maybe you're not really aware of how regular development and traditional development looks like. So first, we can see here the model called waterfall. Now we're trying to avoid to use this model, but that's the traditional model. When we do everything step by step, so first we start to analyze, design, build our code, then we test, then we maintain, and so all of this we do in a sequence. That is like a classic model, which is currently quite old, and now we're trying to stay away from this model, and so we're trying to stay away from this model. What's the problem of this model? So first of all, this development lifecycle is quite slow, so slower than some other ways. So there's a long feedback lifecycle. So there's a long feedback loop, and we will not have immediately response from our customers or from operation team if we have experienced any problems with this application and so on. So there's a slow life cycle, and nowadays it's too slow for the current customer requirements. Another problem, teams here they are separated. So developers, it's one team of developers. Another team will maintain the application and infrastructure, and so quite hard now. And with this model, sometimes it's quite hard to find out where's the problem. Like now, we have some commentaries like the sound is breaking, but at the same time, I know my side everything is well, and some other people say that everything is well. So probably it's on your side, but maybe, who knows, maybe it's somewhere else. Hard to find who's responsible because teams are separated, and each team say, hey, slow because your development your code is not optimal. At the same time, developers may say, hey, that's the problem on your infrastructure side, and maybe some other process is breaking this application because our application is fine. So it's hard to find out who's responsible for what, and teams are separated. So we have a separate team for those operations for development. And the most important in general, it doesn't meet cloud era expectations. What do we mean here? Nowadays, customers, they are more picky because now they also use cloud, and they know what speed means. And they have their own development. They have their own development. They know that with the cloud help, like with the current cloud infrastructure, you can do it faster. And when you still use the old approach, like waterfall, it doesn't meet the expectations of your customers, or maybe your internal customers or external customers, whatever. So this model still exists, but now it doesn't really work well, and too slow and hard to find who's responsible for what. All right, so now from here, by the way, we're not talking about agile model because agile also the model where we can speed up our development process, but that's a bit different. So let me switch to the next slide, and we're going to talk about how we can meet our two teams together, how we can meet development and operations team, and that's called DevOps. So we take development and we take operations. So what is going to be the benefit if we do something like this? So if we bring development operations together. So first, that we bring those teams together, and so they can collaborate. there's no separate teams anymore, and it's hard to say, hey, I'm not responsible for that. My code is optimal, and that's the bad infrastructure, or vice versa. Now those teams work together, and they have this, they must collaborate. In fact, we'll have fast market. Because the development process will be faster. And usually we use, when it comes to DevOps, we heavily use cloud because it's hard to organize this process without cloud. You will see that. You will see later on, because this continuous process, and cloud should be used for that. It may be private cloud, doesn't have to be public cloud. Maybe you have your own cloud internally, but it should be cloud. And the most important now, probably once again, developers should know that already, but maybe if you're not developers, more on like infrastructure side, on security side, you should keep in mind, DevOps or DevSecOps, it is not something that you may just implement right away. It is not one technology that may be installed. It is not a button that you may push, or license that you may pay for. DevOps, DevSecOps, all of those are huge, serious cultural changes. Of course, we may use some tools that will help us to make this process better, but firstly, that's the very huge cultural change. Without changing the mindset, DevSecOps, DevOps, whatever, none of those should work. So that's a huge cultural change. That's why it's not a quick process before you can do all of this. And I will not give you steps how to implement this cultural change. To be fair, it's very long work, but that should be done also on a company level, not just some software that may be installed. That's important. All right. So in the heart of DevOps. Now we are talking about DevOps only. We will add security slightly later. We are talking about DevOps only. So in the heart of DevOps is CI/CD pipeline. So that's the continuous, and the key word here, continuous. That's the continuous process of development and test and maintenance of those of your application. And so you will have immediate feedback loop. So when you may build those releases more and more and more. Some large companies like Microsoft, or VMware, AWS, they may release tens of builds or hundreds of builds per day. And so if we use waterfall, that will be impossible to walk through the whole life cycle, this huge number of builds. So here we have continuous process, and so plan, code. You can see here on the left we have development, like a plan, code, test, release, then deploy, operate, measure, and go back to plan and improve. And that's going to be continuous process. And this is CI/CD pipeline. We call it like the CI/CD pipeline, which is the heart of DevOps process. So now, what is CI? I'll give you a few ideas very quickly. So CI, you may find CI a continuous integration, and this where we build our code and then integrate this code with other developments. So we check in this code, and so it will be integrated with the code we already have by other developers. So this code will be integrated into our existing development. Also, some automated tests will run and analyze this code, that this code is good enough to be released. Next, continuous delivery. Here, it will be triggered by CI. So CI will start CD. And so here we can start to build our, we can build our application and release it to production, and we can see immediate result. And if we fail, we'll fail fast and go back to our initial process, rebuild the code, integrate that, and so on, and we'll repeat the process. So continuous migration and continuous delivery. And that's a traditional DevOps. And now we are talking about security here. So what about security? So now what we can do with where is security here? And to be fair, in classic DevOps, security is outside of the process. So we modernize our development and operation and maintenance. But how about security? So last week, I had a conversation with one of the customers, and the customer said, we discussed different technologies, and I said about containers, and that was the security team. Customer said, our developers, they really want to use containers, but we do not allow them to do it. I asked them why, and they say because we are not ready. So our security team isn't ready to protect and secure containers. So if we have DevOps process, it should be faster development, but the problem is security team will slow down the process. So now, so you may have this CI/CD lifecycle. At the same time, security team will say, "Hey, don't go back to your code because we need to test this portion first. So let me run my tool like Burp Suite or Zap Attack Proxy or whatever. So let me first test all of those applications, and then you may you may release the next one. So we need more time. Now we test that. We will send you the document with the report, and you will fix all of our findings. And that takes a huge amount of time. So security here is separate from all other processes, from DevOps. So that's the problem. And also there's a problem. Security team may not have enough development skills. When security team is separate, so they may not be very proficient in development, and so they may not understand some of those issues, some of the code, and they will just they use tools, then they'll send the report back, and it's hard to communicate. But communication between developers and security engineers may be also pretty complicated because they may not understand each other. At the same time, developers, they may not have enough security skills, and maybe we may not have security experts in our development team. By the way, that's the problem we had a few years ago in my company as well. So my team, we test applications, we use that most of the time, and some other tools, of course. Then we told the developers, like, hey, here's the list of problems. And then developers start to ask questions like, why that's the problem? How can we fix that? How to fix it better? And it's harder to communicate because not all of my engineers are proficient in development. At the same time, they ask questions because they are not security experts. So that's problems of DevOps without Sec. And so you may guess, on the next slide, we will add security into DevOps process, and it will be called DevSecOps. So development, security, and operations. So what is going to be here, and what will happen, and what may be the benefit? First of all, we will merge security into DevOps process. And now the key point, we should shift left. So maybe you heard about that before. Once again, I said that many times. Like if you're a developer, maybe you know more about this. If you are more on traditional security side, and you now at this moment you are away from development, maybe this material new for you. But that's one of the key points here in DevSecOps. Shift left. So what shift left means? It means that we try to take our security. So we try to bring security tests and all of the security measurements to earlier stages. Because let's try to go back to let's say waterfall or even DevOps. Let's security somewhere outside. So we first go through all of those steps to build application, and now somewhere on the testing and maintenance step, we start to test if this application is secure or not. So the idea of left shift is we take those steps on the earlier stages. Yeah, of course, we'll continue to do it later on the stages we have late, like maintenance, on operational stages. But we're trying to shift left. We're trying to give developers more ability to test their code. We'll give them more tools to test their code and their development. And so we want to find the problems on the earlier stages, not after it was released and then we find out that it has a number of vulnerabilities. Yeah, of course, after this we also should test it, but also on the first stages as well. That's called shift left. And so when you implement this culture of DevSecOps, you will hear about shift left a lot. So try to give more responsibilities to developers, and they should be more efficient. They should be more proficient in security. So, and also in DevSecOps, we should integrate security into every step, every stage of DevOps lifecycle. I will show you this diagram later on. All right, so what are some ideas that you may implement in DevSecOps? First of all, teach and empower developers. So developers should know about security more. Yeah, I know. And we mentioned about this before. It's cultural changes. So we must convince them, or if you're a developer, I must convince you now that you should more aware about security, and you should follow security development lifecycle. We'll talk about that soon. So teach and empower developers. And developers should be responsible for security of their application. Because now we want to integrate security into this process, and so developers should be also responsible. But traditional team, like the traditional security team, may become auditor and just periodically run audit, analyze how good this application is. But the current security configuration should be done by developers, and tests should be done by developers as well. And of course, we as security engineers should provide them enough tools for that. All right, so that's some evolution to DevSecOps. Let's take a look at a few more things, and then I'm going to switch to demo, and I will show you some DevSecOps tools. So other topics will be a bit shorter, so don't worry about that. We should be on time. So now let's take a look on CI/CD pipeline and how it may be different when we implement security here. So generally, that's the same pipeline, but now we have a locker side on every step, and now we should integrate security into every step of this DevOps process. So what we can do on development and what we can do on operation side. If we're talking about development side, first of all, implement secure development standards. We have a number of them. By the way, one of the prizes, the main prize is Surface, Microsoft Surface. Microsoft, for example, has their own secure development lifecycle. So just follow those secure development lifecycle standards. Also, you can model what threats we may experience, what problems may experience, and what threats may appear. So up threat modeling, and then we can analyze static applications. So we can analyze static application security and dynamic application security. So what's the difference between those static and dynamic? The idea of static is that we will analyze the code, and I'm going to show you that in demo. Dynamic, that's more our classic that usually security engineers do. That's when we run something like ZAP, the attack proxy, and analyze this application. It's like security scanner, and we run security scanner against just up and running. And also, we should also test infrastructure. And you may ask, wait a second, why it's in development why we insert security in development here if it says infrastructure? Because infrastructure used on that step also must. So that's when we insert security into development. In operations, what we can also do, we can check for compliance. Also, we can scan, and we should scan through API. So we should do quick API scans to make it quick and not run the full. Of course, we can run periodically a full scan like we do it usually, like a local scan. But mostly we should run quick API checks, monitor and feedback, and also monitor feedback is always the case, and also bug bounty. Here, what we can do, we can publish somewhere on website like HackerOne, and like let's say we have a bug bounty program, and we'll pay to if you find this and this. So go ahead, and you may run those tests. So that's some ideas about how can we secure our pipeline. And now finally, so we have 30 minutes till the end of the lecture, maybe slightly more. And now I want to tell about tools with you. I will show you a few slides, and then I'm going to switch to demo and show you some of the tools. But before I start talking about tools, there is a very important question that quite often I hear from many companies. Should we use free tools or commercial? Because, nowadays, most companies, they have the mindsets like commercial is better, but if we want to save money, we can use free, but commercial in general is much more efficient. And here, that's a very hard question. Of course, when you use commercial, you have like a support from vendor. You have probably communicate with developers maybe. So you have some webinars like this, whatever. So commercial, of course, is good. But here, I would say we should use both free and commercial. So there is no versus free and commercial. Each of those, they have benefits and downsides. So for example, free open source. So biggest problem with free open source tools, they must be integrated to each other, and sometimes it's really huge pain in the neck. Really. So each tool separately may work perfectly, but when you want to integrate them, that may become quite painful. Yeah, that's always possible to resolve, but you will spend a lot of time and efforts to do it. So a lot of hassles maybe with free tools. At the same time, also maintenance of those free tools may be a bit more complicated because one tool may be updated. There's a new version of tool, but another tool still has the old version, and they may not be compatible to each other. So, of course, you may use containers to make this process a bit better and speed up this process. But once again, it may be more hassles with those free tools. Commercial, of course, that's like those components are tightly integrated. So, for example, if you usually for DevSecOps tools, it's like a platform, and the components there integrate much better. Also, you have support from this vendor, and in general, when you pay money, you have more rights. For example, you can complain. You say, "Hey, I don't like that. I want to do something. I want to have something different." And if you are a large company, especially if you pay money to this vendor, you may communicate directly and say, "Hey, I want to have this feature, and please release that." And you may expect that soon this feature will appear. So with free, when you don't pay, you don't have the right to do it. But at the same time, what is important here? You can see here the second bullet. Separate tools for each app. So we may use different tools for each application. And developers should know better what tools work perfectly for this specific application. If you have tens of applications or hundreds of applications, you may have the similar number of tools. You don't have to use the same tools for each application. You don't have to. Choice is always yours. And I would say most of the time, we use a number of different tools for different applications. So for one application, maybe commercial and integrated platform. For another one, developers say that this application will be scanned much better by those scanners, by those tools. So we will use those free. So there's no versus, but you may decide what is going to be better for this specific application. So I'm talking to developers now. And finally, you can see here some tools that we have a number of tools, to be fair, but consider to have multiple different scanners like static scan analysis, dynamic analysis, and interactive analysis. So when this application is used, it may analyze security problems in real time. So finally, we have 9 minutes left, but maybe we'll get some extra time. But we'll handle some questions. So let me show you a demo of some of those tools. Of course, I will use free tools, and you will see how those tools, some of them may be integrated. Let me share my screen real quick. John, don't you mind to tell me when my screen is going to be visible?
Okay. By the way, I think you have plenty of time.
Pardon? Plenty of time?
Yeah, I think you do. Yeah, you're good. Yeah,
right,
I can see the demos.
I'm in Cali already. So how about now? Screen visible in general. Oh, you can see everything. So you can see my screen. All right, good. Okay. So, all right, so now let me give you a quick demo. So first, I want to show you like an old approach, classic approach. So let's say we have waterfall, we develop our application, and now security engineers, they want to test that. So we're going to use a tool called ZAP or Z-Attack Proxy. So, of course, there are a lot of configurations. I'm not going to show you all of those configurations. I just want to say that I have dev vulnerable web application 21 deployed in my Azure website. .NET. So that's a free tier, so it will take some time before it's going to show up. And now I'm going to paste that, I'll type that because I think that this virtual machine will not be able to accept my clipboard. And let me type the same here. And I'm going to start my attack. Yeah, of course, normally we should add a lot of configuration, because at least this application has authentication. Let me just find out. Oh, sorry, I forgot about this one. Yeah, so this application has authentication. I must also type username and password, so add form authentication to this ZAP. But it starts scan already. Trying to find out, probably will not find anything on this Azure website. So let me add DWA here, and let's say attack again. And so that's more like a classic approach. Yeah, so now we can see some of those pages, but we will not be able to move on probably because, yeah, there's a login page, and I must also add form authentication. Let me just stop that. And let's see if we have any alerts. Yeah, but we already have some of the findings. It doesn't really matter if they're important or not. But that's like a classic approach. So that's what we're going to do, like when we have the traditional life cycle, when we saw where this application is deployed, and now we try to run our scans and to find out vulnerabilities. So we do not eliminate that in our DevSecOps process, but what we can do in DevSecOps process, we can run our test much earlier. And so first, I'm gonna use a number of tools to run this process. So here I will show you three free tools. One of those is Jenkins. Jenkins will be used to automate the process and so build a pipeline and so trigger different tools together. So it's trigger different tools. I'm gonna also use a GitLab, which is my private GitHub. Let's call it like this. So where I will store my code is a source control. And I will use also SonarQube, which is going to be the scanner of code that will be deployed into GitLab. So in my GitLab, I have this code. Yeah, of course, I may add the release, but I will just trigger the build manually. Come on. Oh, thank you. So here I have my application, and so this application is stored here. In Jenkins, I have pipeline. So in this pipeline, this pipeline will connect my GitLab. Give me a second.
The interruption. Please stand by while we reconnect Sergey.
Sorry about that, folks. We've lost Sergey, but we're about to get him back. So we can continue this great demo. Just a reminder to everyone that we're giving away a Surface Pro at the end of this summit, so please stick with us to the end. We've got 2 more great sessions planned. And you won't want to miss them.
Can you hear me again?
Yep, you're back with us.
Wow, thank you. That's the downside of dial-in, because I had another call and I had to drop it, and it looks like I dropped all the calls I had.
That's always something.
So sorry about that. We have 2 minutes still to continue to finish the demo.
You're good.
So I think thank you. So now you can see here my application in my GitLab, and so that will be integrated into Jenkins. And so what I want to do when I push the new release, that means when I push the new code, I want this code to be scanned by SonarQube, which is a static code analysis, and I will do it through Jenkins. To Jenkins that will automate this process. The problem is here, not the problem, sorry. I don't want to push any new code. I just want to make it as quick as possible, and I already pre-built that. Let me build a pipeline, and so let me just push that manually. Let me just build from Jenkins manually. I don't want to do any new pushes, so let me just keep the same code, and let me just say build now. So now. It will take this code from source control. So find a code in source control, and the next step, look at this. So it's looking for vulnerabilities using SonarQube analysis. Yeah, it's very simple pipeline. Of course, we will have some other steps after that. So we may run them then we can build a solution. We then can run that, but this time automatically from Jenkins as well. But here it's just running the static code analysis. It takes some time. You can see here around 3 minutes. I'm not asking you to wait for a whole 3 minutes. So I already have those 10 results. I can jump back to SonarQube, and I can see here what do we have. So overall code, and I can see there's a number of bugs and security hotspots. So now we can see like there's a very bad rating for this application, and I can see what may be the problem here. The list of problems, and of course this, and that is not just a report from security team that will be sent back to developers. That means some of the development, and they may find out on the early stages. They don't have to wait the life cycle before they get this information. And of course, so we may have some other steps, but that's going to be out of scope of this demo. So, and I use these free tools on virtual machines, GitLab, Jenkins, and SonarQube, and Kali as a separate machine. But of course, we don't have to do it on virtual machine. I'm just showing you not the best example, maybe not bad example to be fair, but not the best. So much better is to use containers. Let me run Ubuntu machine. This time VMware workstation. And so let me show you how it may look like in using containers. I'm going to have here Docker installed on Windows. So here we have like interface, but on Linux it may be a little bit differently. So I have images here of Ubuntu and Redis, but that's my Windows, so I'm not using really Docker here. Let me just wait before, it's going to appear. Oh damn it! I need to press Control-Alt-T, but I don't have. Give me a moment. All right. So let's type Docker PS. Oh, thank you. And now I can see containers that are running currently. So I can see that GitLab is running container, Registry is running container, SonarQube running here. How about Jenkins? So Jenkins is not running. It looks like I just need to run that manually. But anyway, so I can do it in containers, and I can do it on one machine. I don't need to have the whole infrastructure for that. So containers may be quite very useful for you to organize this DevSecOps automation process, because tools, once again, they are not, the DevSecOps is not about tools, but tools will be able to can help you to automate the process. All right, so hope that was informative. I have a few more slides for you, and then we'll jump to your questions. Let me know when you can see slides again. John, I'm asking you to do it. Or
Sure. Let's see. We can see the slides now.
All right, good. So you can see that. So we have few slides left, and then by the way, there's a question about that. I think I already answered the question in Q&A about Jenkins should run this container VM. Whatever you want. VM is nice, but of course containers will be better because it will be much faster. You'll build that much faster, and also it will be, you may transfer those environments you may transfer those applications from one environment to another. So I would think containers will be a bit better solution in our DevSecOps environment, in our DevSecOps world. All right, so a few more slides, and we are ready for your questions. Do you remember the name of the session? Session called Future of Why DevSecOps is the Future of Enterprise Security. To be fair, I cannot. John, no one. Maybe John can. I know. We cannot predict the future. At least I cannot do it. So we cannot predict the future. We don't know how to predict the future. But currently, what do we see here about DevSecOps? So the future of DevSecOps looks quite bright, and so it should be pretty nice. Of course, we did not expect. So I think it was 6 years ago. Microsoft said that Windows 10 will be the latest version of Windows, and we will not have any new version of Windows anymore forever. And this year they're going to release Windows 11. So everything may change in the future, but at this moment, DevSecOps should be fine, and it will be more and more development. Security will be more and more integrated in the future. So if you are a developer, you should learn security more about security and security lifecycle. And if you are a security engineer, let's start to dive into development and DevOps. All right. So, and finally, we are ready for your questions. Go ahead. John, I think you will read those questions.
Yeah,
right?
I'm into the questions. I want to, let's see here. Let's see. I just want to remind everybody that you can type your questions into the Q&A box at any time. We'll do our best to get to all of them. I have a quick question myself before we get these. I hear a lot about people investing in developer security champions. How important is it for an organization to make that investment?
If you understand what is that, developer security champion, it's super important. But unfortunately, what I usually see that they expect too much from those security champions. Maybe because the name of this role sounds very tough, and this one should know all us top 10s by heart, vulnerabilities, and how to find them manually. Should be the very good developer and can develop any application as well. So quite often what I see, they expect too much from those security champions. If there are no that expectations, security champions may be very nice, and they can drive those changes help to drive those changes.
One other thing that comes up a little bit in my travels is this business of sort of being, on a mission to eliminate all vulnerabilities during development. Is there first of all, that's crazy, but second of all, is there a strategy for, how to quit trying to eliminate all vulnerabilities during development?
How to eliminate all the
how to stop doing it? How to stop doing it? Because it's not possible.
So first of all, implement security development secure development lifecycle, and that will definitely limit the number of vulnerabilities. But I would say that the best thing here will be prioritize them, because you cannot eat all of the frogs at a time. And so first of all, you must fix that the vulnerabilities. They may lead to compromise, to exploitation. And we always have some vulnerabilities, small vulnerabilities, and of course when we have time for them, we can do it. But first of all, you must eliminate those that make. So you must prioritize them first.
Gotcha. Okay, here's a question from the attendees. How does DevSecOps deal with role or access segregation between development and production?
So, how does it deal with role or access segregation? That may be like a big deal, because first of all, DevSecOps doesn't say a lot about how permissions must be assigned, because each company solves this issue individually. First of all, we must decide what our developers will be responsible for. And if we have this if we have this left shift, So developers will have more responsibility. And so then they have a bit more permission. But what we usually see when we run audits, developers usually they have just even without any DevSecOps, even without any last shift. So they want to be a full administrator in this environment, and they don't want to leave any permissions. And so they want to leave any permissions. So in general, there's many systems, they allow you to have like just-in-time administration, and when you can assign only permissions you need and only for the specific time period. So for example, if developers, for some reason, they need to have permissions to do something that they don't have permissions for, they may activate those permissions for this short period of time, but don't have those permissions forever. And the most important, we automate as much as we can. And so developers, they don't really need to do those things manually, and most things will be automated. Yeah, of course, they must log into the tool and see the report, but they don't have to, log into machine, see all of those files. And of course, depends on the application. So we try to automate, and that will also eliminate the need to do some manual actions, and so they don't need to have permissions for that as well.
Gotcha. Here's another one. I am considering getting a CSSLP certification. Is there an additional certification I should consider to be successful in the DevOps arena?
I would say here, you may use some generic certification, but also probably when you work with this DevOps, DevSecOps, we have some vendors that organize their own vision of that, and they have their own certifications. So AWS, Microsoft, like examples, like huge companies on that market. And then they have their own certifications related to DevOps, probably not DevSecOps, but DevOps at least. So you should take a look at those on those more specific certifications as well.
Yeah, lots of questions about certifications. Another attendee is wondering about certifications for AWS and Azure, which certifications are available. So that's something definitely to follow up on. Let's see. How about this one? What technology allows you to deploy? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I just say use Google to find out those certifications.
There you go. Okay. This question is, what technology allows you to deploy applications with all dependencies across different environments?
Are you asking about containers? Yeah, of course, containers. Containers. So the idea of containers, and that's what I already want to stress in our DevSecOps and DevOps in general. So you may have different environments, like dev environment, sec environment, and DevOps environment. That's different environments. And so if you want to make a test environment, also make a difference. So if you have containers, it may be more consistent because you just build application container and move them around. So containers.
Fascinating. Sergey, I think that's all the time we have for questions for this session. I want to thank you very much for a very informative session. Our presenter, Sergey Chivarov, is a great. I was trying to look here. Your credentials are overwhelming. Anyway, thanks, Sergey. It's really great having you, and I want to thank VMware Tanzu for making this session possible. We're going to take a short break and be back at the top of the hour for our second session of the day. DevSecOps 102, 10 best practices for every enterprise. That session will be presented by Carlos Rivas, Senior Solutions Architect at Intervision Systems, and hosted by David Rammel, Editor-in-Chief of Visualization and Cloud Review. Now would be a great time to check out those resources on your console provided by our sponsor, VMware Tanzu. And remember, during today's third session, we will be giving away a Surface Pro 7 tablet. So stay tuned. Back in a few.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you to our speakers, my fellow moderators, and of course our sponsor, VM Tanzu, for underwriting this summit and allowing us to bring you this great content. My name is David Rammel, editor of Virtualization and Cloud Review, and I'm here to moderate the second session of our Enterprise DevSecOps Summit called DevSecOps 102, 10 Best Practices for Every Enterprise. Our speaker for this session is Carlos Rivas, Senior Solutions Architect at Intervision Systems. Carlos helps California community colleges move their traditional data centers to the cloud. Over the course of his career, he has worked for several large telecommunication providers, managing and configuring network devices using numerous tools and languages, including Java, Groovy, Python, Perl, and PHP. He's also a cloud computing instructor for LinkedIn Learning and Udacity. Carlos, it's great to have you here. Please take it away.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And I have this awesome conversation with you guys today around the world of DevOps and DevSecOps, and hopefully you'll pick up something valuable along the way. If I don't answer your questions or concerns, feel free to reach out. There's my LinkedIn on the screen, so feel free to reach out and connect. I'll be more than happy to answer questions around cloud topics or DevOps. And with that, let's get going. So we want to talk about DevSecOps, but of course I always like to start my conversations around this topic with definitions, simply because this can mean a lot of different things. If you ask 10 different engineers, you get probably 10 different answers of what exactly this is. So let's just start by defining DevOps, for example. DevOps, one could say that it's a set of practices that combines software development and IT operations. The goal is to shorten the development lifecycle and to provide continuous delivery with high software quality. The tricky part here is that you are shortening life cycles and doing a continuous delivery. So the problem with this is if you are always delivering something, that just increases the risk for you to miss something along the way, or just tell yourself, oh, I'm going to do this at a later time. I don't want to get into this situation right now. I'll just deploy it now, and then I'll come back and fix it later. And that creates potential gaps where attackers or bad actors can get in and take advantage of the whole situation. So enter DevSecOps, which is simply an evolution of DevOps as development teams begin to realize that the DevOps model isn't, adequately addressing security concerns. You don't want to be in that situation that I just mentioned, where you say, well, I don't have a credential manager right now or a key management system, so I'm just going to go ahead and hard code this value into my code so that I can actually meet my sprint requirements and have this code deployed like that. You never want to be in that situation. So if you follow a DevSecOps approach, what you're going to be doing is putting security first. So just like in test-driven development, for example, TDD, where you write the test first and then you write the code to make those tests pass, you will be doing the same with DevSecOps. You want to emphasize security as a top priority, not that something you want to do later because it doesn't really impact, quote unquote, impact the functionality of your application, and you say, let's do this later. Well, no, that doesn't work. So it's something that we want to keep in our heads at all times. So in order to talk about this topic, I'm going to cover some areas, starting with developer best practices. As you know, in the DevOps world, everything starts with the source code. So you want to be from there picking up some good practices from the very source of the information, which is, the developers. I have a separate tab here called automation. And, if you think about it, that should be part of developer best practices. But there's many employees working DevOps that are not necessarily developers, and they don't even have a development background at all, such as a DBA, for example, somebody that's an expert in your databases, or you may have a system operator who's concerned about system uptime and metrics and things like that, and they could benefit from automation, but like I said, they have no interest in learning how to code, and that's not part of their job. So that's why I talk about automation as a separate thing here. Of course, we're going to mention something here about vulnerabilities, because if we're talking about DevSecOps, vulnerabilities are number one. You want to be aware of those issues, especially around the third-party software that you use, any libraries that you may use. So you want to keep that on top of mind in the world of DevSecOps. And of course, you can't have these conversations without talking about governance and compliance as well. This is simply because it's a lot easier to have peace of mind when you're going home at night if you know that your system is fully compliant and governed by certain rules and standards that you have in place, and perhaps even enforcement tools to keep those standards in check. And of course, yeah, we have to certainly talk about that. And finally, I'll talk a little bit about metrics, because you simply cannot improve what you cannot measure. So the goal is to measure pretty much everything, all the way from the developers building their code all the way to milliseconds used for performance in production. The most metrics that you can collect, the better informed that you are going forward to make decisions and improve your software and your lifecycle and continuous delivery and continuous integration. So with that, let's just get started right away with talking about developer best practices. The first thing I would tell you about this topic, even without looking at any slides or anything like that, is please never hard code any sensitive information in your code. I know it's very, very tempting to say, well, I need to access this API, so let me go ahead and hard code this API key into my source, because anyways, this is internal in the company. Never think that way, because whenever you hard code something, you got to understand that your code is going into a code repository that is going to be shared amongst a group of employees, right? And you don't want everybody else to be seeing those API keys, especially if those keys are assigned to you and you only as a developer. So never put any kind of sensitive information. In fact, before I get into this, I could tell you a story about a person that I worked with in the past, and they had the unfortunate event of checking in code without realizing that it was not a private GitHub repo, it was a public GitHub repo. So when you make that check-in and this goes out there and it's available for the whole world to see, now you're exposing confidential information to the world, and let's just say the customer is not going to be very happy, and you're going to find yourself in very hot water. So as a developer, your number one tool is, protect yourself against putting stuff in the code repository that shouldn't be there. So what else do I have in this world for developers? Well, the first thing I would highly recommend is, of course, have some sort of CI/CD pipeline, which in this case, it could be Circle CI or something like Jenkins, which is very, very popular. And if you're in the cloud, then you can use something like Azure DevOps or AWS Code Pipeline. So you have various tools to get that done. So a pipeline is going to be your first line of DevOps automation. So once I have my pipeline tool, what do I do next? Well, the very first thing that you should do is create a build process. A build process is going to help you, as you're collecting, you're collecting Docker images, you're collecting third-party libraries, and all this integrates with the source code that you're creating and helps you create a deployment package, which, by the way, could be the end result of your build. It's not necessarily something that you have to do right away, but yes, once you have your build, you can also create a process to deploy that. And that deployment could be what is known as a blue-green deployment, for example, where you could have various environments that don't collide with one another, so you can have a deployment that even if it fails, it's not going to affect any other deployment that you have perhaps working already. If we're getting into that, then you can consider automating tests, for example, or automating a rollback process in case of failure. If you work in the cloud, for example, in AWS, there's a tool called AWS Code Deploy, and it has a built-in rollback functionality that you can use. So if you have a deployment that fails, you can just click a button and say, hey, I don't like this deployment, I want to roll it back, and it will revert your servers back to their original state, and you don't have to worry about that. So don't worry about doing all these things all at once. As you get started in the world of DevOps, just start with a nice pipeline that can build your project properly, and then we'll go and add things from there. This is, for example, what it would look like if you were to do something, the whole workflow. If you were to use one of those tools, like I mentioned, CircleCI, GitLab, Jenkins, or AWS Code Pipeline, you would have a change committed, and that's going to trigger a build. And of course, the build, as I mentioned, is going to collect libraries and anything that's necessary to support your source code to make it work as you expect it to. And of course, then you have the whole process all the way to deployment. And it's going to vary for everybody. So I'm not going to get into specifics here because obviously, if I talk about Python, you may be a Java person or something like that. So it's going to be a very, very different for everyone. But in general, something like this would apply regardless of what it is, the language or backend tools that you are using. So one thing I recommend, once you have your build process established, now you have your code checking in, and then it goes through a build process and generates a binary artifact that gets deployed. So where do I go from there? The first thing I recommend is to set up some style checks. For example, you could have a tool that is going to look at source files and see if there's something wrong in your source file, whether it's not properly formatted, or, as I mentioned, credentials. You can actually have tools that will scan the source code for sensitive information, and it will give you an alert if those things come up in the source. So this is great because you can have like an immediate pipeline failure in the event of something being detected there that shouldn't be there. Again, this isn't super great because the code is already checked in. But it's good to spot it as soon as possible and say, hey, what are you doing? You just put in this secret API key in this repository. It should not be there. Let's go ahead and roll back that commit. Use some other method of authentication that doesn't involve checking in passwords into the source code, and you can enforce this with a tool. We haven't picked it up yet, and we're talking about definitely automating absolutely everything, and this is one of those things that is great to have automated, because let's be honest, nobody's going to be going over every single line of code, especially if you have a large team working on software, and that large team is producing hundreds, if not thousands of lines of code per day. So if you have a profiling or linter, as it's called, a tool that is just looking for potential issues in your software, it's great to have this as part of your DevOps pipeline. Moving on, the same applies to binaries as well, not just the text file, which are the source. This can also apply for your dependencies. So you might want to be able to check your third-party software. Let's say that you're coding in Java and you download some library that's going to help you achieve a certain goal. Let's say that goal is connectivity to network devices. In that case, of course, you have to understand that particular piece of code was also created by normal people, developers, just like we are. And the same rules apply to them. Even though it's a solid tool that's been tested by others and is used by a lot of people, it's also open to errors and breaches. So it's always good to have some sort of tool or some kind of information that can help you validate, hey, is this safe, Do I need to be concerned when I'm using this tool? Is there an issue? Is there a potential issue? Am I using the latest version? Because you could be in a situation where the software gets updated regularly, but if you're not going to the vendor all the time to get the latest updates, you may not have the latest version with the latest patches. So just something to be aware that when you get a library, even though it's quote unquote off the shelf software, that doesn't mean it's perfect. It's also open to the same security breaches that your own source code is. So just something to keep in mind at all times, because this is a very sensitive topic where you're really proud of your software, you really enjoy the whole process, and you're very, very secure about everything. And then you come in with this tool that you got from somebody else, and this tool happens to be the one breach into your system. It's really not pleasant. So just something to be aware of. Anyway, switching gear to automation, which is not really any different from what I just mentioned. The thing is, I wanted to keep it separate for the reasons I stated, is that not everything that you're going to automate is going to be from the developer's perspective, since you have an operational side of the business as well. And those guys also need help with automation, even though they're probably not very good at scripting or programming in general. So they just want some assistant automating things, like what do I do to capture metrics? What can I do to, just keep my service running without having to be on top of the servers all the time, checking everything manually, right? They also deserve tons of automation. So let's talk a little bit about this. Going back to CI/CD, the tools that I recommend for this were Jenkins, for example. Jenkins is very, very popular, and it has tons and tons of plugins to help you in this sense. So using that as an absolute most. I can't even imagine doing DevOps without a tool like Jenkins or Circle CI or AWS Code Pipeline or something like that. You need this to just be able to have that visualization into your workflow and, just get things done in general. Now, there is one thing. If you're building software all day long, you don't want to have to go into these tools that I just mentioned all the time to check how are things doing. So you want to set up these tools with an automated notification process. And I put two ideas here. One is email. The other one is Slack. When it comes to email, I just use email for the most important things because, we can get a ton of emails in a day. We don't need more distractions, right? So it's just getting emails from the automation is just going to make things worse. So what I do is I only send emails from automation when it's a critical security breach or something like that, like, hey, somebody just checked in a password into a source repository. Then that deserves an email. Or, for example, somebody just installed a third-party library and there's a known vulnerability to this library, or somebody just installed Windows 7 in a machine, and this machine, happens to be end of life. There's no support anymore. So those things are worthy of an email so that somebody can take a look right away. For the rest of the normal, failed tests or building or something like that, Slack messages are fine. But even in this case, you need a separate Slack channel for the automation. You don't want to be flooding your development team with automated messages all day long because for the same reason, they're just going to ignore them if they just, get a ton of messages. So what I recommend in this case is just create a separate Slack channel just to get these notifications and just have them there. Again, these are not non-critical notifications. So it's just something that is a nice to have. Metrics is also very important to automate, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that coming up. Because you have CI/CD metrics, let's say that you want to see, how many times are we building a day? Are we failing those builds? Are we completing those builds? And the same goes for vulnerability. And this is one of those things that I recommend that you keep track of using, like I said, an email. If you have a vulnerability failure within your CI/CD process, you want to send some kind of notification that it gets seen right away. This is not something that you want to say, oh, yeah, I'll check it out later. Let it pass. Let's go ahead and deploy this software. No, this is one of those things as part of DevSecOps that you want to keep an eye on all the time, right? If you're having, if your metrics around vulnerabilities tell you all the time that you're having failures constantly, you might want to have a sit down with your team and say, hey guys, what's going on? What can we do to improve these metrics? Because this isn't looking great. I have this screenshot here. This is just a plugin that I found for Jenkins, and not something that I necessarily recommend, but it's something that you can use within your Jenkins or any other tool that supports plugins. And this is essentially a security scanner. This is one of those tools that will, it's already designed to look for certain things around your code. So because we're talking about automation, you don't have to do everything by hand or, send it to a testing team that has a security expert. No, you can actually set up some tools that will check your software for potential issues. So it's good to know that there are tools out there that will do this for you. For example, here we're looking at a screenshot of Jenkins, and it would have metrics. You have failing tests, you have tests that are passing, you have error messages, and these are the things. I'm showing this example because a failed test doesn't necessarily mean that you should stop your build process. If you have automation, you can see a failed test like this and still say, you know what, let's go ahead and push this thing to production, not to production, but at least to promote it to the test environment so that the tester team can actually take a look. But I don't recommend something like this if the failure was not a test, if it was a vulnerability scan. In those cases, yeah, I absolutely say, you know what, let's not push this forward. Let's go ahead and stop this process right here and, go take a look and see what's going on. But, something like a regular software test, it's okay. If you understand what's going on, you can say, you know what, let's push it, and then we'll deal with that later. Jenkins is also a great tool that you can use, for things like notifications. I just mentioned Slack, and Jenkins actually has a plugin for all this. Have to, do this stuff manually. Like, oh my God, do I need to write a Slack API code to integrate with my CI/CD tools? Well, yeah, if you're using something like AWS Code Pipeline, for example, which to my knowledge does not have an integration directly to Slack, then yeah, you may need to spend a few hours of coding and configuration time to get to those notifications sent to you automatically to a Slack channel, for example. But just know that tools like Jenkins, for example, which is very, very popular for CI/CD / DevOps, it will already have a plugin to do that for you. You just need to set it up with an API key, and you're off to the races. Now, speaking about vulnerabilities, this is really the most important thing when it comes to DevSecOps, is just being aware that there are potential issues to every piece of software out there. And the more aware you are of those issues and how to work around them or resolve them, the better off you will be. So, talking about vulnerability scanning, I just mentioned that there's a plugin for Jenkins. This may not be enough for you. You might want to, do other things, run software that is specific to your use case, where you can say, well, I can do this. Let me go ahead and test this load balancer or connect to my server using this penetration testing tools, and those things that you may be able to automate, but at this point in the workflow, they're still not part of your CI/CD process, but these are things that you may be able to automate and also integrate later on. But yeah, just know that if you want to do DevSecOps, you want to be able to test your application for weaknesses as soon as possible, to be honest. Something I recommend is to fail your CI/CD based on scan results. This goes back to the Jenkins test screenshot that I mentioned, that if you have a failed software test, that's okay. Just let it go. But if you have a vulnerability failure, you might want to, intentionally error out your CI/CD process just to be able to say, okay, let's take a look. Let's try to understand what's going on here. We don't want to be in a situation where we have this soft be, at least bulletproof in some way, and it's not. So we want to understand what the at least what the level of risk is before proceeding. And something that people often overlook is containers. You want to make sure that even though containers are like little virtual machines on their own, but you want to be able to test those as well, right? And there are specific tools that I've seen that are just designed for scanning containers. So you want to make this as part of your CI/CD also, because this is really, really important to not assume that because you have this trustworthy container that you would put your source in there, which will get things done for you. But it's still, like I said, it's still a piece of software written by somebody, and that somebody is a human just like us, and that software is also going to be exposed to potential weaknesses. So there are plenty of scanning tools that are specifically designed for containers, so just keep that in mind. And that takes me to this point here, which is choose source container images carefully. It's very, very tempting to go to Docker Hub and say, oh, look at this container image. It does exactly what I need it to do. What you should be asking yourself first is whether this container image is from the vendor themselves, or was this created by some third party or just some contributor to the overall repo. And, my response to this is only use container images that come from a reputable source, somebody that you trust 100%, just like I mentioned, like the actual vendor of the software. So if you're downloading, Apache Tomcat web server, for example, make sure you're getting the image from the Apache Foundation and not just some random image that you found in there, which could be perhaps modified by somebody in a less than optimal way. Let's just put it that way. So it's something to keep in mind, especially for developers. It's very, very tempting to shortcut the process of getting things done by downloading some random container image that already kind of sort of does what they're looking for. So it's also good to, keep those people honest in that sense, right? Now, talking about that same conversation about containers, so this is how you would, do that flow is just, start with design. That's like, which container image can I use? What can I get out there that is trustworthy, something that I can actually use and not be concerned like what's going to happen, right? And even then, you're going to scan for vulnerabilities because, like I said, even if you have a trusted piece of software in your hands, 6 months down the line, somebody's going to find a weakness in that piece of software and it's going to exploit that weakness. And if you're not up to date in vulnerabilities, you may be exposed to that particular case. Beyond that, like I said, you run it through scanners, you run it through your normal CI/CD process and testing and all that. And in the end, you'll get exactly what you're looking for. This is no different than traditional CI/CD pipelines where you have your own software integrating with normal non-containerized libraries and everything, and just deploying your code to a traditional server. Again, this is no different. It's just that you're using Docker-specific tools for the sake of scanning for potential problems. And of course, there's always the tools that are give you beautiful dashboards such as this one. And the goal here is to make it obvious what the problems are. And remember, you don't have to, if you see something red, you don't have to just go like crazy. That I do recommend is that if you see something red, never push that to production or anything like that. Just take a look and make an informed decision. Because something you need to remember in DevSecOps is that you are trying to minimize risk. I don't think you'll ever be able to completely eliminate risk. That's where we all want to be, of course. But just be aware that there's always going to be red messages in your scanning tools, and you just do your best to mitigate those risks. But I don't think we'll ever get to the point where thing is eliminated. In fact, probably the only way to eliminate risk 100% is to isolate a computer from the outside world, from the networks, but that wouldn't be exactly practical, right? We need to be able to interact with the outside world, through the internet or some other connectivity, such as VPN or something like that. Switching gears a little bit, let's talk about governance and compliance, which this is a set of tools that I recommend to give you a lot more peace of mind. And this is more on the ops side of DevSecOps, because at this point, your code is written, your code is in production, or at least, it's in the test environment or something like that. And in that case, now what you want to do is enforce a certain behavior or enforce a set of standards, right? And to get to that point, you can use these tools. So let's talk about this. So compliance is to make sure your solution it sticks to a specific compliance framework. I usually, for this example, I like to use something like HIPAA or PCI DSS. You have a set of rules that say, if you want to be PCI compliant, for example, let's say you have information coming to you and it needs to be encrypted end-to-end while in transit. And when the information is stored on disk, it needs to be also stored encrypted. So you have, for example, those compliance rules. I'm sure there's plenty more rules that need to be in place, but that's just one of them. And you would have, certain tools that are going to make sure that these standards are being met. So just keep that in mind that even though these are rules written on paper, there are tools that can help you detect when you are breaking those rules, if that's the case, right? And speaking of that, there is plenty of tools in the world of governance, simply applying those rules to make sure that your environment meets requirements and is aligned with the company's goal. So what do I mean in this case? So if you have, let's say, 10 servers in production, in a production environment, and then a new server comes online, and server number 11, and you don't know who put that there, why is that thing in there. You can have a software, and I'm going to talk about that here in a second. You can have a piece of software that's going to say, hey, there's something new in production. Nobody authorized this change. I'm going to go ahead and shut it down. So you can have a software that can actually go ahead and detect any changes in your environment and say, I don't want this change because this change is not approved. Let's go ahead and eliminate this potential risk. So yeah, that's when DevSecOps automation comes in and helps you, get around those issues. So speaking of those, for example, if you use AWS, you can use a tool called AWS Config, which is going to help you with that. And AWS Config depends on the CloudTrail, which is the AWS audit trail. In this case, it will look for potential changes in your environment. Like I mentioned, deploying a new server or making a change into an existing server, such as eliminating connectivity or disconnecting a disk drive or something like that. If you find these changes with AWS Config, you can trigger an alert that will be sent to the operational team and say, hey, there's something going on here that shouldn't be happening. Let's go ahead and try it. This is AWS Config Works. It's essentially a tool that is going to be looking at your audit trail of events, and based on whatever happens there, you can set up rules that say, hey, this is happening. We don't want this change. What should we do? Are we going to send a notification? Are we going to create a log entry with what happened? Are we going to archive these changes and put it in storage just so somebody can come in and take a look? So these tools will certainly help you in that sense. If you're not into AWS, there's a tool. This one is open source, so you can use it as you wish. And it works with AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud. And it's called Cloud Custodian. And it does essentially what I just described. It's a set of rules that you can enable in this particular tool, and it will enforce certain governance in your environment. For example, I always like to say that if somebody launches an EC2 server, let's say a Windows machine, and this machine happens to be a little bit big, which will break the budget for this particular department for that month, So you could use a tool like Cloud Custodians, for example, to go right ahead and say, no, this machine is not authorized. Let's go ahead and shut it down. We don't want this machine to be doing anything in this environment. And it's going to protect production workloads, because usually production workflows are very, very well established, and everybody knows what is going on in there. You have, this servers and this database and, and this backend server. And if anything changes outside of a maintenance window, you can have a tool like this detect that change and even, like I said, revert it or prevent anybody from making that change. So it's good to have an inspecting tool like this, which is automated. And once you have it running, you don't have to worry about it. It basically, like what the name implies, is a custodian for your environment in this case. Now let's talk about metrics. Metrics is essentially just a way to keep track of whatever is going on in your environment. You can go as granular or as global, or keeping the overview of the whole system. Once you can go as deep as you want in this case, but metrics is the only way that you can improve everything I just described. So, if you don't know how many errors are you getting or how slow is the application running, this is really the key to DevOps in general, especially DevSecOps, is to measure as much as possible, because measurement is what's going to help you improve going forward. So what should I be measuring then in that case, if I'm going to be measuring everything? Well, you can start with build issues and vulnerabilities, as I mentioned. Usually you will have software that can keep track of these things. And of course, once the software goes into a production environment, then you can start thinking about operational metrics, like, why is this server taking this long? Let's measure loading times. Let's measure how much memory is it using. And by the way, measuring memory, it doesn't sound very entertaining, but once you have like a spike in memory usage, that can give you a hint that the code might have a memory leak or something like that. So even just tracking memory usage is a very useful metric to find problems. Loading times is also very, very important. Because especially when you're developing a deploying strategy for your software, you want to be aware, like, okay, every time we deploy the software, it takes 30 seconds to load, for example. And you want to be aware of that so that you don't create tools that are going to time out because of these 30 seconds that you didn't account for. So measuring those things are really, really important. I/O usage, for example, if you have a certain number of disks drive and you want to know if they're fast enough to keep up with the application, you have to start by measuring your I/O overall. And the same goes for network traffic. This is the one that I like the most, because your application is going to have a certain network bandwidth usage at all times. And if you ever find a spike outside of the normal scope of your application, that is certainly an indication that, there might be something wrong. You're either under some kind of attack, let's say a denial of service attack, or your application is having a good day and there's a lot of people using your application. So measuring network traffic is very, very useful in that sense. Now, how am I going to collect all this stuff? Well, if you're in the cloud, let's say AWS, you can have CloudWatch and the CloudWatch agent to measure all that stuff, and you'll be fine. If you're outside of AWS, you can use an open source tool, which I really prefer, like Prometheus. And I'm going to show you a Grafana dashboard here in a second. Prometheus is great. It's actually now included in AWS. I believe they have it, even though, like I said, it's an open source tool that you can freely use. If you want to go the commercial route, there's also Datadog and New Relic. So those things are certainly out there for the purpose of keeping tracks of metrics and monitoring in general. And of course, that brings me to dashboarding. Dashboarding is really, really important, because once you have all these metrics coming to you and they're aggregated somewhere, you have to have some sort of way where you can actually see them in a useful way. Because just collecting a bunch of numbers with timestamps is really not going to help you very, very much. So you need a smart way to analyze this information. In that case, you can use a tool like Grafana, which is essentially designed for dashboarding. And it pairs very, very well with Prometheus. So once you have like a Prometheus server that's collecting metrics from all your servers or your applications and everything, you can gather all those metrics and just create some custom dashboard like the one you're looking at. And that would just essentially help you with the visualization aspect of that data. And of course, this way, it can help you make more informed decisions. The same goes for your CI/CD tool. In this case, I'm showing a screenshot of GitLab. And the CI/CD tool will also have metrics. And, you want to keep track of what's going on with your build. How are the vulnerability scans doing? How is my testing framework doing? How many failures are we getting? And overall, you can use your CI/CD tool for that as well. And finally, I decided to include this CloudWatch anomaly detection screenshot simply because you see the area where there's a spike in red. You can have a machine learning algorithm detect that something is going on and give you an alert when something gets outside of the normal envelope. In this case, the gray area is the normal expected behavior for this line. And let's say this line is CPU usage, for example, which is pretty common. And once it gets outside of the envelope, it will show in red, and they will send you an alert, and you don't have to have an employee looking at this chart 24/7. You can have just machine learning analyzing this data at all time and alert you when something is going on. So even with the dashboard, like I said, you don't want to rely on people that may be tired or it's the middle of the night or something like that. You can use an automated tool for this as well. So key points that I would like to take away from today is automate as much as possible. Even if you're not a developer, even if you work on the operational side, as you've seen, you have tools like this Prometheus and CloudWatch and Cloud, a lot of tools that you can use to automate things, even if you're not a developer yourself. And of course, security should be part of this automation as well. So including the container scanner, the vulnerability scan, all those things, you can automate them as much as possible. And of course, you can never improve anything that you don't measure. So keep track of those metrics, CPU usage, disk usage, memory. Those are the most basics, but actual behavior of your application, loading times, number of users, number of sessions that are simultaneously open, all that stuff. If you keep track of those metrics, you can use that information to go back to your development team and improve your application going forward. And of course, never try to do everything at once because that's how things really break. So just take one of these metrics, the one that is more of a pain point for your business, and just improve this one metric going back to the development team and all the way through to production to make this one improvement, and then repeat that with the next metric that is becoming a problem. And if you do that over and over, you'll have the most efficient DevOps cycle that there is. So yeah, that should get you there wherever you need to go in your software development life cycle. And with that, I am open to questions.
Okay, great stuff, Carlos. Thanks. We will take some reader questions. And I'd like to remind the audience that we can answer questions until about 5 minutes to the top of the hour in order to give you a short break before the next presentation. So send them on in. And we'll start off with a very simple question from Adam. Carlos, you were talking earlier about getting email and Slack notifications, and Adam asked, what do you think about SMS notifications instead? More active than email, not lost in the inbox flood.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. But I will say the same thing that I said for emails, that if you're sending a notification to a phone through SMS, it should be something that is definitely read, something that's definitely critical for your application, because otherwise people that get a ton of notifications that are a lower priority, what happens is you'll start getting too many of these notifications, and people will tend to ignore or even block those if they're not significant enough. So when you do send one of these SMS notifications, which you can do from most AWS services or even Jenkins. You don't have to be in the cloud for this. You can certainly set it up like that. Just be sure that it's something that people are going to actually pay attention to this and not just say, oh, here's another message, I'll look at it later.
Okay. And here's a question from Arvin in the audience. First of all, he said, hi, Carlos. So he might know you. And then he asked, can we leverage tools like Aqua and Prisma, which cover lots of ground in vulnerability, dependency, and auditing? Are there other tools in the same space which can be used?
The answer is yes, absolutely, and that's really the goal. I don't know if those particular tools integrate well into a CI/CD process. I'm sure that there's a way to do it, perhaps using specific scripts to get them to load and run. But yeah, the thing is I usually do mostly container-related development, so that's why I mentioned these container-specific tools. And these tools, they also have connectivity to back-end databases of common vulnerabilities. So they will certainly, it's not something that you have to update all the time. They'll be aware of, hey, there's new problem that was found in the WordPress blog. So you better either update to the latest or, deal with this issue. So yeah, absolutely. To your question, yes, you can use those tools and just look for container scanners, and you'll find plenty of, I think I've seen like 2 or 3 commercial options and probably a lot more open source tools in that sense. But yeah, whichever one you're using, just make sure that, you put them as part of your CI/CD pipeline as well.
Okay, great. Seems to be a lot of audience interest in these third-party tools and software. Here's another one on a question from Maurice. What is your opinion on Graylog?
I really have no opinion because I have not used Graylog at all, so I have no idea what that is. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's an easy one. In the same vein, Randall asks, are any other open software you could reference for GRC?
Well, let's see here if I can remember one. I don't, and the reason is, I'm highly biased AWS in that case, so I've used a lot of tools in that space, but not another. I don't have another off the top of my head that I could recommend in that particular sense, other than the one that I just talked about here, which is really good. But again, it's cloud specific. If you're not in the cloud, so that tool is probably not good for you. But yeah, I don't know another one right now at the top of my head. But you can hit me up on LinkedIn, and I'll surely be able to answer that for you.
All right, great. Specialized help for our audience. Another bonus. Here's a question from Lucinda. Do you recommend using continuous monitoring in sandboxes and production in reference to small/moderate deployments?
The answer is going to be yes and no. The thing is that sometimes in the sandbox environment, you might want to deploy code that you are aware that is broken or has some issue, because simply you want to get it to the testers for some reason to maybe test a different feature, even though you're aware there's something broken in there and it's going to crash or whatever. So you don't want to have too strict of monitoring enable in this particular environment. But of course, yes, when we're talking about production, I usually prefer a much more sensitive monitoring tool, something that will detect anything and everything as soon as possible. So yeah, in production, just go for it, all in when it comes to monitoring, but be a little bit more flexible in the lower environments for sure.
Okay, great. Here's the question from David. He says, we are in Azure totally. We use Grafana, Prometheus, New Relic extensively. And he asks, would you recommend consolidating these to Azure Monitor?
Again, I'm a little bit biased, and I really like working with Prometheus and Grafana. So I'm going to say no in this case. The thing is, Sometimes, well, not sometimes, most of the time, open source tools are more continuously updated. So you may get the benefit of new features and more security by using tools that are constantly updated, such as Prometheus or Grafana. And yeah, I can tell you that a lot of Fortune 5 companies use these same tools. So there's no real, unless you have a specific Microsoft-related or Azure-related feature that you want to take advantage of, I would say stick to your Prometheus and Grafana setup as it is right now.
Okay. And here's kind of a follow-up question from Maurice when we were talking about Graylog. He explains that that's a tool for getting a syslog server and getting all possible data from servers, apps, networking appliances, and the like. And after explaining that, he says, so what do you use for centralized logging?
Okay, now I like it a lot better. And the one-word answer to that is Splunk. Splunk is not exactly cheap. It's quite a bit expensive, I would say, especially to host it because it's an application that requires a good solid back end to run. But yeah, that's what I personally use for my clients when it comes to log aggregation. That's where everything goes pretty much. So yeah, definitely in this case, I'm more inclined to the commercial solution, which is a Splunk in this case.
All right, great. Here's a question about another tool. See if you've heard of this one. Aramba. Rohan asked, is Aramba a good tool for GRC?
I have no idea. I don't know where all these exotic names are coming from.
Okay. Fair enough.
I haven't heard of that one. So.
Okay. Here's a question. How do I know it is time to update a piece of software for security reasons?
Let's see. In that case, it's usually just I would start with the vendor. You would have to keep like an inventory of your software and the versions that you're using, and just be in touch with the vendors. There are specific tools that are designed to check for dependencies versioning. But for example, something like Microsoft Windows is not going to tell you, hey, I'm out of date or something like that. You would most likely get like a notifications from Microsoft saying, hey, Windows 2012 or 2016, this is going to be the end of life. Beyond that, we're not going to provide any support. So in those cases, you need to be aware of your vendors and your version numbers and your overall software inventory to be, stay on top of that. And perhaps use tools to keep you honest in that sense, but just be aware that it's really your responsibility to know when things are going out of date and it's time to update.
Okay, great. Looks like we have time for one more question, maybe two. Let's get right to it. Here's the question. Can I scan for credentials in the source code of my application?
Yes, that would be a tool. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but there are tools that are designed to look for regular expressions or PII, that type of information that's stored in source code. So yeah, there's definitely tools that you can use for that. And of course, I can't really, even if I could, I shouldn't give you one because, if I code in Python, then your application may be in Java. So you need to find a specific tool for the language that you're using. But certainly the answer is yes, you can scan for PII, passwords, and API keys and all that being stored in the repo and reject those automatically from your CI/CD tool.
Okay, last question comes from Rajan. Going forward, how are organizations going to differentiate GRC and COE, and who takes primary responsibility for DevSecOps leads?
That's a great question. I would say the security officer at your company should be the person to go to. And usually that role, this is why this question is great, because that role is usually traditionally centered around networking security. So it's an employee that is in charge of making sure that nothing gets hacked, right? Now we're talking about, okay, now what about governance and compliance? Because those things aren't necessarily security breaches, but they are, around security. They're kind of related there. And just like governance is kind of in the same boat there. So I would say that, yes, it's definitely part of that organization, but just be aware that they may not be able to do everything. So let's say that a certain piece of code requires encryption, even though the developers doesn't report to the security team. Obviously, they're developers, but they need to make that change. Say, hey, you need to implement HTTPS in your code. You need to implement security encryption end-to-end. This needs to be done prior to this code being accepted into the production environment, because we have this regulatory requirement for PCI DSS or HIPAA or something like that. So yes, it's kind of a gray area, I have to admit, because you have employees that don't report to that team, but they still have to do the work as well. So I would still put it within the security team, but just be aware that, there's other people outside that will need to help for sure.
Okay. Well, it looks like that's all the questions we have time for. Thanks again, Carlos, for a great presentation and answering those questions.
Welcome.